Uh, Dr. Dharmanand, I have known him for almost 2 decades now, and he's the most well-balanced rheumatologist one could come across. Thank you, Dr. Dharmanand, for joining us today. You all know that he's the one of the early rheumatologists to come to Bangalore and start practicing, and he is a graduate. He's actually 3M medical colleges. That's how he tells about himself. He is a graduate of Madurai Medical College, MD from Mysore Medical College, and DM from Madras Medical College. So 3Ms. And uh, he has been the longest president of Karnataka Rheumatology Association. He's currently the past president of Karnataka Rheumatology Association. And he's the president-elect of Indian Rheumatology Association. He's going to talk to us today about COVID-19 in treatment of rheumatic diseases, what is its relevance. This is the most important topic. It is the most important hot topic in the current times. Request Dr. Dharmanand to please go ahead with his talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanita, for the wonderful and kind introduction. I think somebody has to allow me. Yeah.
We can hear you.
Yeah. They have to allow me to share the slides. Yeah. So my slides are visible, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Good morning. So the next 10-15 minutes, I will discuss the impact of COVID-19 on the treatment and management of rheumatic diseases. And Dr. Chandrasekhar chose me to deliver this talk, probably because I'm the one who had a first-hand experience of COVID-19. I did develop COVID in early part of pandemic and successfully recovered. Probably that is the qualification I have to give this oration. How did rheumatologists look at COVID? And rheumatologists were one of the earliest ones to pick up on this COVID pandemic and publish. And within few months of pandemic breaking down in Italy, we had publications from the Lombardy region of Italy, where the pandemic was very severe. They had 33,000 confirmed patients, of them more than 1,000 requiring admissions. So they followed 320 patients who were on biological DMRDs and targeted synthetic DMRDs. Most of them were rheumatoid arthritis, and some of them are spondyloarthritis. And the majority of them were on anti-TNF, and most of them were on other biological DMRDs and targeted synthetic DMRDs. In this group, they had only 4 confirmed COVID-19, and another 4 had symptoms suggestive of COVID-19, and 5 other patients who had exposure to COVID, and 4 were on hydroxychloroquine. And of these, only 1 got hospitalized, and most of them recovered. None had any death or cytokine storm. So they hypothesized that immunosuppression may be protective against hyperimmune response. I think this topic was discussed by the chairperson, Dr. Vinita. So immunosuppression, either because of the nutritional factors or because of the medications, may be protective. So this thought process came out very early in the pandemic, during the pandemic period, as early as March and April. There are quite a few recent publications confirming this observation. And this is a publication in Seminar in Arthritis Rheumatism. The conclusion was adult and pediatric patients with rheumatic diseases on targeted biological and synthetic DMRDs do not seem to have a higher risk of COVID-19, or they are not at a higher risk of developing severe complications. These studies were quite reassuring. These are one of the recent studies. There is one more recent study published in October, again on similar lines. The highlights were, so this is one of the first studies to report the prevalence of COVID-19 in a vulnerable immunosuppressed group. And the prevalence is not higher compared to the general population. That means patients with rheumatic diseases on multiple immunomodulating drugs are not at a higher risk of developing COVID. So, they also notice that they are not getting a higher rate of severe cytokine storm. So the conclusion was our patients can be reassured that they need not stop the treatment and only follow the general guidelines. And this is one of the recent abstracts published in presented in American College of Rheumatology meeting few weeks ago. Again, this study reiterated that most of the patients with rheumatic diseases, when they had COVID, they had only mild illness. So this data has been quite reassuring, but there's one more viewpoint. Patients with rheumatic diseases compared to control population, they are more likely to follow the isolation measures than general population. So that means because of the perception that they are immunosuppressed, they have rheumatic disease, they have comorbidity, our patients are more likely to self-isolate or protect themselves against infection compared to a general population. So all the previous studies have to be interpreted slightly with this knowledge that many of our rheumatic patients are so isolated that they are not getting exposed to this illness. So if all our patients get exposed, whether the results would be the same, only time will tell. So what happened during the pandemic? India we locked down in the end of March, and till today we are in some form of lockdown. And there were a lot of headlines telling that immunosuppressive drugs increase the risk of COVID-19. People with multiple comorbidities affect the prognosis, and they are at a higher risk of cytokine storm. And our patients had multiple comorbidities, and our rheumatic diseases are one of the comorbidities highlighted. So most of the headlines in the magazines and journals and newspapers all over the world have something like this: immunocompromised patients are anxious about being left behind in coronavirus pandemic, living with immunosuppression during coronavirus. There were quite a bit of talk on this topic in almost all social media. So what happened to us? So rheumatologists are inundated with calls. Doctor, I'm on immunosuppressants, I'm on biologicals, I have comorbidities, am I at a higher risk? Should I stop steroids? Should I stop methotrexate? Should I stop biologicals? So many of them even did not call, they stopped their medications on their own, only to flare subsequently few months later, and they had to come to the hospital to see us. And next chapter is hydroxychloroquine and the COVID tamasha. The moment President Trump announced that he is on hydroxychloroquine, and he publicly announced that I have called Modi for hydroxychloroquine tablets, and big tamasha started. And same time, FDA started warning about very severe side effects of hydroxychloroquine, particularly cardiac side effects. So this created another problem for our patients. Hydroxychloroquine vanished from the stores. People were hoarding hydroxychloroquine. Everybody, whether they have rheumatic disease or not, they started storing hundreds and thousands of hydroxychloroquine tablets. So it totally went out of market. And reports of cardiotoxicity gets very wide publicity. And people were discussing about how such a toxic drug can be given to patients with COVID. And when again, we started getting calls again. So one of the problem is hydroxychloroquine is not available, do have an alternative. And medical shops will give only supply for 30 days. So they are calling us to send a repeat prescription. And the most important query was, is it safe? And most people were petrified that they have been given a toxic drug and none of the rheumatologists have warned them that it is a toxic drug. So this is a big problem we faced. And the patients with autoimmune rheumatic diseases were the main focus during this pandemic, because these are the patients who we also consider that could be vulnerable because they are immunocompromised. Even the disease itself has got a slightly higher risk of infections. Apart from our medications, many autoimmune disease patients are also vulnerable to get some infections. So the focus is on autoimmune rheumatic diseases like lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, scleroderma, vasculitis, etc. And medications relevant to this current scenario, people were worried about non-steroidals, corticosteroids, disease-modifying drugs, biologicals, and targeted synthetic molecules. So what about NSAIDs? As early as March 2020, French government had issued warning about using ibuprofen and NSAIDs for fevers, because ibuprofen is believed to increase the expression of ACE2 receptors, which can increase the viral uptake by the pulmonary epithelium and may lead to severe course and complications. So, though there was no strong evidence, there is some crosstalk. Could you mute, please?
It's fine now.
So, yeah. So the advice is, if the patients are on non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, and if it is essential for their well-being, say like people with ankylosing spondylitis, they cannot function without non-steroidal many times if they are not on biologicals. It is advised to continue until they get an infection. So the advice is, if they get a COVID infection, to stop NSAIDs and use paracetamol for fever rather than increasing their NSAIDs for fever. So the advice is not to use ibuprofen or any NSAIDs as an antifebrile therapy, and rely on paracetamol if you want to treat the fever. And if the patient with rheumatic diseases, if they require NSAID, they should not be stopped. They need not be stopped. And issues with immunomodulation. Immunomodulation itself can increase the risk of infection. The risk is very variable depending upon the disease. Like patients with lupus are inherently more likely to get infections, vis-a-vis patients with ankylosing spondylitis or other reactive psoriatic arthritis. And the drugs which we use, like steroids above 15 milligram, are very immunosuppressive. Cyclophosphamide is more immunosuppressive than methotrexate. So the drug determines. And of course, there is a patient factor. Not all patients with high dose immunosuppression develops infections. So the patient factors, whether they are diabetic, their age, their immune homeostasis, their diet, whether their gut bacteria is good, all these things decide whether they get infections or not. And of course, biologicals are perceived to cause more severe infection than conventional DMRDs. Of course, high dose steroids are more immunosuppressive than low dose steroids. And dose dependent, like 25 milligram of methotrexate is likely to be more immunosuppressive or immunomodulator than 5 milligram or 7.5 milligram methotrexate. And also different drugs makes us prone to develop different infections. Like anti-TNFs makes us a little more prone to develop tuberculosis. Drugs like baricitinib and tofacitinib may increase the risk of herpes zoster, like that. And of course, if you are on more than one drug, you are more likely to be vulnerable for infections. Steroids, the advice for steroid is, if you are on steroids and if you develop COVID, and steroids should not be stopped. And they need to consult their rheumatologist or the primary physician who is prescribing steroids. Stopping steroid definitely increase the risk of disease flare. During any infection, many times patients require higher dose of steroids. If they are on long-term steroid, body's ability to increase the steroid to take care of the infection will be compromised and they are at a risk of Addisonian crisis. So the advice is not to stop steroids if they are on it. If they are on high dose steroid, we can bring them down to a acceptable lower dose, but not to abruptly stop. And disease modifying drugs, all disease modifying drugs don't have the same risk of infections. And drugs like hydroxychloroquine, sulfasalazine, apremilast, maybe drugs like penicillamine, which we hardly use, probably they can be continued at the same dosage without worrying about compromising on the ability of the body to fight the infection. Little more immunosuppressive medications like methotrexate, leflunomide, azathioprine, mycophenolate, tacrolimus and cyclosporin, cyclophosphamide. So these drugs definitely needs to be stopped for a few weeks when the patient gets an infection, but there is no need to stop them prophylactically. So we don't know how long this pandemic is going to last. So we cannot be stopping these drugs, which can be sometimes life-saving, many a times limb-saving and functional saving. They can protect their functions. So they should not be stopped prophylactically, fearing an infection. So we have to balance the risk of disease flare versus a theoretical risk of increased risk of infection with these drugs. Next group of drugs are biologicals, and we can include JAK inhibitors in this group because of the equivalent potency and versatility of mechanism of action. We have anti-TNF drugs like etanercept, adalimumab, and infliximab, etc. And rituximab, secukinumab, abatacept are different biologicals having different mechanism of action, and tofacitinib and baricitinib are the JAK inhibitors. The recommendation here is to stop when one has infection. We are talking about COVID here, and it is probably true for most of the severe infections except for the very mild. And we can consider restarting after a complete recovery. And once again, the advice is not to stop prophylactically. Again, we are balancing here the risk of infection and risk of flare. And what we have learned from our the previous studies to say that the patients who are on these drugs are not at a higher risk of developing disease, and they are not also at a higher risk of developing more serious diseases. This is one of the recent article which gives us the recommendation, which I have already dealt with. If you are on steroid, if you are not exposed, you can take it, but during hospitalization, you are supposed to stop, and it can restart after the recovery. And except for chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, sulfasalazine also, they have asked here to stop during infections, but there is no need to stop before infections. All other drugs, they can be continued before infection and stopped during hospitalization and restarted post recovery. So this is the recommendation which I have already alluded to. And this BSR guidelines gives you a kind of a risk score. If you are on disease modifying drugs, you have like a 1 score, and you have 3 scores if you are on cyclophosphamide, and high dose steroid gets 2 points. Any dose between 5 to 10 milligram, 20 milligram gets 2 points, and more than 20 milligram get 3 points. And all other drugs, if you are on, you will get 1 more extra point. And if you have comorbidities like kidney disease, rheumatic disease, diabetes, etc., you get 1 more point. So if the score is higher, you are at a very high risk of complications from any infection. Better to shield yourself. And the moderate risk patients will have to maintain social distancing, etc. So this is a useful guidelines to segregate and shield our patients who are at a higher risk For example, a Wegener's granulomatosis or a granulomatous polyangiitis patient who is on high dose steroids and either rituximab or endoxan. So they will be on a score more than 3, and these are the patients probably we need to shield them from others who might get infection, and also shield them from any source where they can get an infection. So what are the measures a public with rheumatic diseases should follow? We would recommend all the other vaccines, including the flu vaccine, but not to prevent COVID. And we still don't have a data whether we should take a MMR vaccine, measles vaccine, BCG now to protect us against COVID. So it is better not to indulge in that. All the vaccines have their own problems, so we don't want to take an MMR vaccine now and develop a major neurological complication when the chance that it will protect against COVID is very low. Of course, most patients who are on high-dose steroids and immunosuppressives, though the data is fairly reassuring, we are not yet sure whether it is true for all the patients. So it is worth, wherever possible, stay at home, work from home, avoid unnecessary social visits. Our patients, our community as such, we are very fond of attending marriages, and we don't want to miss any deaths. So quite a bit of our patients develop severe COVID, and surprisingly, rather than the patients with rheumatic disease dying, their husbands who are supposed to be normal died. So this COVID causes more problem to men than women. So it is better for the patients to avoid public transport and unnecessary social visits. Try video consultations with their doctors unless they have something to show. And of course, the standard measures which is recommended by the government, like hand washing, sanitizers, masks, social distancing, have to be maintained by these patients. Once this pandemic has come, all our associations, European League Against Rheumatism, American College of Rheumatology, Spondylitis Society of America, all have come out with guidelines for the patients. The basic theme of all these guidelines is not to stop their anti-rheumatic drugs and to consult their doctors if they get COVID infections, and consider stopping the drug only under medical supervision. And another interesting aspect which has have us involved in the care of COVID is the cytokine storm. Cytokine storms have a uncanny similarity to many of our autoimmune rheumatic diseases like macrophage activation syndrome, HLH, and adult onset Still's disease. So all of these illnesses are hyperinflammatory syndrome, where body's immune system goes haywire and produces a lot of cytokines, and this cytokine results in a lot of multi-organ failure. So the COVID cytokine storm is very similar, and because of that, rheumatologists got involved, and many of our rheumatic drugs were used in this situation as a solution. Hydroxychloroquine, because of its action on endosomal pH, so it might reduce the chance of viral entry. And baricitinib has been tried for this purpose. Tocilizumab has been very popular during the early pandemic as a treatment for cytokine storm because IL-6 was found to be elevated. But controlled trials have not shown benefit, and it has now gone into disrepute. Ivermectin has been used widely. Anakinra, anti-TNF, all these drugs were used for cytokine storm, and probably most successful and most enduring has been dexamethasone or methylprednisolone. But I have noticed that this drug has been indiscriminately used, and used should say with varied level of confidence and scientific basis by clinicians. Anybody who had some lung shadows were given steroids. But if you look at the original studies, it is clear that the only patients who were oxygen dependent or on ventilator did have a survival benefit with steroids. those who are not oxygen dependent, if they are given steroids, actually there was a slight increase in morbidity and mortality. So steroids can increase the risk of life-threatening secondary infections like mucormycosis and other infections. And Chandrasekhar had recently published post-COVID inflammatory syndrome. So as a rheumatologist, we are likely to face quite a bit of post-COVID inflammatory syndrome. His study had an example of central retinal artery occlusion, few patients with rashes, post-pulmonary COVID reactive arthritis, and post-COVID pulmonary fibrosis, etc. We have also seen few patients with mononeuritis multiplex post-COVID. So in summary, our advice from the rheumatologist is we can continue non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs if needed by the patient for their rheumatic diseases, but not to use this drug as a fever drug. Use paracetamol as a first choice. Don't stop steroids and consult the rheumatologist or the concerned physician in case patient with steroid develop a severe COVID. And don't stop disease-modifying drug prophylactically. If there is an infection, most DMRDs and biologicals can be stopped for a week or two, and once the patient recovered, can be restarted. Drugs like hydroxychloroquine can be continued throughout. And of course, we would advise our patients until the pandemic is shown to be totally over to maintain their social distancing, hand washing, self-isolation, and shielding depending upon the risk profile. The higher the risk factors, like if they are on higher immunosuppressive doses of cyclophosphamide, higher dose of steroid, multiple disease-modifying drugs, and also multiple comorbidities like renal disease, interstitial lung disease, severe diabetes. These patients, we would continue to advise self-isolation and shielding. And immunosuppression story in COVID-19 is an interesting story, still a not yet fully resolved story. And we need to watch for post-COVID autoimmune diseases, and probably rheumatologists would play a role in treating many of the post-COVID autoimmune diseases. And probably we also are going to see a higher risk of chronic pain, chronic fatigue syndrome kind of illness as well. Thank you. Thank you very much for patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Dharmanand. That's such a superb review of all the relevant issues in the current times of COVID-19 infection. This session is now open for questions. Dr. Veena, could you check if there are any questions in the chat?
We have a couple dropped in, ma'am. First question is Vijay. He says, sir, how many days should we need to wait after COVID start DMRs or biologicals? And do we need to do a swab mandatory before restarting meds, since some data such could be shed over months?
Yeah, so COVID virus can be there in the swab for a few weeks, 2 to 3, 4 weeks, even after the patient has fully recovered. So I have a first-hand experience. Though I had no symptoms after 10 days, my swab became negative after 21 to 22 days. So in the earlier days, we have to get a swab negative to get back to work. So now we know that after 2 weeks of recovery, patients need not require any swab. So we assume that they have been cured, kind of. So I would start the patients back on their disease-modifying drugs 2 weeks after recovery. At least 1 week. So from the beginning of the disease, if they have recovered by 10th day, 11th day, 12th day, I'll wait for a couple of more weeks to start on biologicals or disease-modifying drug. Again, it is variable. If the patients are very symptomatic, I would start them a bit earlier.
So there's another question from Dr. Sorry.
Dr. Vinita?
Yes, Dr. Dharmanand, would you advise the patients to take COVID vaccine, our patients with rheumatic diseases?
Again, vaccination in patients with rheumatic disease is always a controversial area. And we generally advise, and it has been a reasonably sound practice, and we did not face any problems with pneumonia vaccine and the flu vaccines. This COVID vaccine being a new vaccine, probably we will wait for some time before we strongly advise our patients. The blanket advice is probably they should take, but I will wait for some time, because we are America and England, they have started vaccinating. Let us, before it comes to us, at least we will have a month of data from these countries assuring us the safety, and if it is found to be safe, definitely yes.
Yeah, I think the only thing which we need to consider is the live versus killed vaccine.
Giving to our patients who are on moderate to severe immunosuppression.
Immunosuppressions, yeah.
Yeah, and COVID vaccine is going to be killed vaccine, so it's not a live vaccine. So
we have both. mRNA vaccines are
mRNA.
live vaccines. The Covishield is supposed to be a killed vaccine.
yeah, even mRNA vaccine is not a virus. It is just a viral carrier. I think it's not considered as a live vaccine. Subject to correction.
Now, viral carriers behave like virus.
But they don't have viral protein, no? The core proteins are not there.
They have a mRNA which need to be contained. If you don't, they have a proliferative potentials. See, what is our concern is all these have a proliferative potentials if unchecked. So we really do not know, if immune system doesn't check it, what is the end point. So as you said, of course, we are doing it all after 3 months of experimentation in other population. That way we are a little safer. But general principle is, if there is any proliferative type of things, is best avoided in immune suppressed or immune compromised individuals.
That's a good point.
The other point which we need to consider is, what do we expect as in terms of degree of efficacy of the COVID vaccine, whichever Indian government brings into our country, whether it will be as efficient as in a normal population, in diabetics, in elderly, and in our moderate to severe immunosuppressed patients. That's another important thing which we need to continue. And that's why it's very, Dr. Dharmanand has very rightly said that masking, social distancing, and keeping ourselves sanitized is going to stay for a very, very long time for our patients, isn't it?
Yes. I think this because now both doctors and patients have got used to wearing a mask and using these measures. I think our patients who are on immunosuppressed, it may not only for COVID, probably it may prevent infections in general.
Right.
Apart from the other measures like having a better diet, sleep, all the other measures, probably using the social distancing and mask could be a long-term measure for highly immunosuppressed patients.
Right. Do you have a comment on post-COVID pulmonary fibrosis? How should one approach? Should we consider it like CTD, lung fibrosis, or should we consider it like idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis? How should we approach it?
I don't know. At this moment, I have no idea. But most of the pulmonologists have noticed that they're trying perfenadine and other drugs. They are treating it like a fibrotic disease rather than inflammatory disease. So at this moment, I don't know whether there is enough data on the histology of what's happening in the post-COVID fibrosis. I will have to look at the literature.
Thank you.
There is another question from Dr. Mukhtar. Which infection, exactly viral or fungal, have you seen to be more associated with trigger an autoimmune rheumatic disease in the Indian population?
I think that Chandrasekhar has already alluded to. I think Chandrasekhar is the best person to answer this question.
No, can I get the question? Sorry.
Which type of infection, bacterial, fungal, or viral, is known to trigger an process of autoimmune in the Indian population?
Oh, okay. I mean, certainly there is no data with reference to that. The most common, we presume, are EBV, CMV, and herpes group of viruses. In the bacteria, we presume them Proteus, Klebsiella, and some of the chlamydial group of infections. It's a presumption because we really don't have a much elaborate data with reference to these trigger relationship. As I said, there is a very first base confusion is that whether they really trigger it. If so, which one of them the trigger in which set of populations. I mean, it needs a very elaborative studies to answer that question. I mean, that's a question to be addressed by the next generation potential researchers and rheumatologists.
Yeah, in our experience, we have seen a lot of viral infections triggering lupus because of the increased production of interferon, and it makes sense. So viral infections definitely can.
His answer is in India. So
in India, yeah. In India, also been our own personal experience. A lot of patients who are on very well controlled lupus for a long time, suddenly they get a major viral infection and the SLE flares. So we have noticed it, but it has not been like properly documented. And to say that this virus causes, that virus doesn't cause.